how do we know that Mars had water? What evidence did we find? What measurements did we make? And then how do we know that, or do we have any information on why it lost its water?
Well, that's a good question. One of the things, again, if we look at ancient rocks on Earth, there are physical features of rocks, things like ripples that you see, if you go to the beach, and things like cross bedding, where you have beds aren't, strictly parallel to the surface, that tell us, in some cases, about waterborne movement of particles. And we see those in ancient Martian sedimentary rocks. We also see evidence of water in minerals. So if you look at gypsum, for example, gypsum is calcium sulfate, but it also has water molecules. So if you see gypsum on Mars, there was water there when those things formed. And so both chemical and physical information tells us that there have been times in Mars's fairly early history when there do seem to have been fairly widespread lakes. It's been argued there could have even been an ocean in the northern hemisphere. But the other thing that interests me is that people rightly say, well, these persisted for long periods of time, maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of years. But, given that we're talking about an interval that's, 1 billion years long, it may be that early Mars was episodically warm and wet. And my friend and colleague, Robin Wordsworth, and I have explored that a little bit. I say we, but Robin did all the modeling. But I think we agree that Mars may well have been episodically wet, that when you have either massive volcanism or a major meteorite impact, that can transiently change the planet so it becomes warm. You get liquid water, but then things cool off, quiet down, the water leaves. So to me, what it looks like is that early Mars certainly had intervals of time that were relatively warm and wet, but those intervals have become fewer and fewer through time. And it may well be that even by the time we first start seeing evidence of life on Earth, Mars was going out the other end of the tunnel. So.
What is the philosophical implication of finding life on Mars? One of the reasons everyone got so excited about finding water or evidence that water could have existed on Mars was because apparently water played such a crucial role in the origin of life on Earth. What is the weight of the finding? Let's say tomorrow we find out that Mars has life or had life in the past. How would that change our worldview, if at all?
Well, I think it would. And I should say that when we were first finding evidence of water on Mars in the Opportunity rover years ago, when we first had the first press conference to show what we were finding, that night I looked on all these news websites, and every one of them said, with one exception, said Mars could have supported life. And it was actually Wired magazine said Mars could have supported life, but did it? And yes, water for a rocky planet is probably a very important part of what makes a planet habitable or allows life to evolve. I think if we found that life once existed on Mars, it would have been microbial life. And certainly at the surface, it seems not have persisted. There's an ever-present community of people who thinks that Mars still might harbor life in the deep interior where there is liquid water and hydrothermal heating. Going to be a long time before we can actually test that kind of hypothesis. But I think if we found that life existed on Mars or on the planet or the moon Enceladus or Titan or something like this, it does an important thing because having two examples is infinitely better than having one. That means we know that even in our own local neighborhood, our own solar system, life evolved more than once. Now, you might say, well, maybe it evolved once and was carried by a meteorite from Earth to Mars, or actually much more likely, Mars to Earth. I don't get excited about that. I know some people do. But I think just finding even a little scrappy signature of a bacterium somewhere else immediately says, yes, life did exist in more than one place.
I can see why you don't get excited by the panspermia hypothesis, because it just pushes the question to another source, but we haven't answered the question. I want to zero in on one thing you mentioned, which is very interesting. You said it'll be better if we have two examples instead of one for the origin of life. As a counter to that, Nick Bostrom has put forward the thought experiment that if we do find life on Mars, it would be really bad news, that we don't want the second example. And that's because if we were to find life on Mars, that would mean that we have to update our Bayesian priors for the existence of life from 1 in a trillion planets in the observable universe all the way down to 2 out of 9 within our own solar system. So it's a massive, massive downgrade. And then that would imply, because of the Fermi paradox, because of the great silence, we've not seen life anywhere else, that it seems like if it's that easy for life to emerge, that there has to be a great filter somewhere in the future. And that means that's bad news for humanity.
Well, we're going to have to deal with whatever reality is. So I think we can get used to it. I think it is interesting that, let us say that many planets have given rise to not only life, but complex technological life. And it may be that happened 5 billion years ago on some planet in another solar system, but that planet has been dead for a long time. So the idea that you can evolve complexity, biological complexity on other planets or moons doesn't mean that all the intelligent life that ever existed is around today and they're just not, inviting us to see them. So I don't think we know. It's, again, one of the reasons why I like the idea of finding a second data point is it cuts in half the speculative possibilities and you start having to focus on certain things. So I don't know that we're going to find evidence of past life, let alone present day life on Mars. But I think if we would, I think that would actually be a great day for humanity.
I tend to agree, but Nick Bostrom has scared me. I'm not going to lie.